Excellencies, colleagues, students, welcome and thank you for attending today's In Conversation event. The format of today's event is geared toward allowing plenty of time for questions from the audience. I will introduce our special guest who will give initial remarks on women's rights, global feminism, and sustainable development, after which we will open up the floor for questions from the audience. So it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest, the Honorable Claudia Roth, Vice President of the German Bundestag, the National Parliament of the Federal Republic of Germany. As one of 5 Vice Presidents of the Parliament, she represents the Greens, which stands on a platform, nice music, quite appropriate, I think, the Greens stands on a platform of ecological, economic, and social sustainability. Ms. Roth comes from a theater studies background, having worked at several theaters in Germany before managing the pioneering German political rock band Tonstein Scherben. Is it correct pronunciation? I read German, but my pronunciation is not very good. From there, Ms. Roth went to become a spokeswoman for the first parliamentary group of Alliance 90, the Greens, in the German Bundestag. This party was formed when the Alliance 90 from East Germany joined the Greens of West Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, a panel of which we are proud to have on display in our atrium. And thus, she witnessed both the rise of the party and helped to negotiate the country's unification during this critical time. In 1989, she was elected to the European Parliament and remained a member until 1998, presiding the Greens from 1994 onwards. In 1998, she was elected to the German Bundestag, where she chaired the newly formed Committee on Human Rights and Humanitarian Aid until March 2001, when she was elected chairwoman of the Greens. Between March 2003 and October 2004, she acted as Commissioner for Human Rights Policy and Humanitarian Aid at the Federal Foreign Office before being re-elected as chairwoman of her party for 5 more 2-year terms. She left the position in 2013. Subsequently, she was elected Vice President of the German Bundestag, a position that Ms. Roth has held since then. Ms. Roth, thank you so much for taking the time to visit us today. Our Qatar campus was established in 2005 as an additional location of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and one of the universities within Qatar Foundation, which itself, the School of Foreign Service, was founded 100 years ago in response to World War I, the so-called war to end all wars. The role of our school in the wake of this war, as envisioned by Father Edmund Walsh, was to prepare students for all major forms of foreign representation in the public and private sector, including in commercial, financial, consular, and diplomatic fields. Following his vision, we believe that in a global world, we have to have people prepared with historical and cultural understanding, language competency, and business and economic understanding to make lasting ties between countries that will create peace and stability in the world. Ms. Roth, one of the reasons we find it so instructive to talk to top diplomats around the world, such as yourself, is that we gain a unique perspective on the challenges and opportunities facing policymakers today. Today's world is so interconnected, the challenges we face are common, and so we must work together to try to find solutions for these challenges. So thank you again for speaking to us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Claudia Roth.
Dr. Dalal, most distinguished Dean of the University, students, guests, friends, ladies and gentlemen, my dear Ambassador. Many thanks for the invitation to join you today. It's an honor, it's a pleasure to be here. I just come from the Interparliamentarian Union Assembly. I would call them the United Nations of Parliaments, bringing members of parliaments from all over the world together, almost from all over the world, this time not from Saudi Arabia, not from Egypt, not from Bahrain, not from the Emirates, which we deeply regret and don't understand. This conference takes place in a world in disorder, a world where those who hold the rule of law in contempt, the enemies of democracy, and the opponents of equality and pluralism are growing not only vocal but also stronger. A world which confronts us with colossal challenges, a world where there are crises and conflicts wherever we look. A world where 263 million children and teenagers are not in school, and 70 million people are displaced refugees, internally displaced migrants. Despite that, however, no, precisely because of that, we all have even more of a responsibility to persevere in making the world a better place. At our IPU gathering, we talked about the role of parliaments in our respective political system. We talked about the catastrophic impacts of the ongoing climate crisis. We talked about the brutal war in Yemen, one of the most terrible humanitarian catastrophes in the world. We talked about the implementation of the Paris Agreement and how to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, which were agreed by us, the international community. But we also talked about equal participation and equal pay for women, and we talked about LGBTIQ rights. Many of these major social policy challenges and issues particularly affect I now speak to the students, your generation. And so I'm especially pleased to have this opportunity to speak with you and to discuss them together with you here today. The word together is especially important to me because one thing is very clear. The answer to these difficult questions cannot lie in Germany, in Europe, or in Qatar alone. It can only be found through global partnership. That, however, requires a highly diverse array of players, parliaments and governments, a free and vocal civil society, activists, academics, universities, school students, and students like you, the makers of tomorrow's world. They must all be able to participate because they all have something to say. Also, it may not please the people who are currently running the show in politics anywhere in the world. We can see a very, very good example of this in Europe right now. First in Sweden, and now in countless other countries and cities across Europe, school children are demonstrating every Friday under the Friday for Future hashtag. The movement was started by 16-year-old climate activist Greta Thunberg from Sweden, who was no longer willing to accept that also everyone is talking about the climate crisis, not enough is being done to tackle it. What started as a protest by a handful of youth has now grown into a major movement that is putting pressure on governments around the world and forcing them to justify themselves. These young people are demanding action long overdue to stop the climate crisis because they say our future is at stake. Of course, these students have encountered hostility. They are put under pressure and are criticized for skipping school. Many adults act as if these young people should not be taken seriously, claiming that they are far too young to be doing something like this and that they lack credibility. But perhaps these young people have a better grasp of the situation than many adults. In any case, they have already succeeded in putting the issue of climate change, or better climate crisis, which is happening with increasing speed on the European and international agenda. And they have every right to do so. Because they, and by that I also mean you here in this room, as well as every other young person around the world, you are the first generation to feel the effects of climate change. At the same time, you are the last generation that can halt the catastrophic climate crisis and limit global warming at least to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that is why you have every conceivable right to criticize and stand up, especially against the people who are blocking your path to the future. So if you have challenging, critical, perhaps even fundamental questions about the future, questions that you would like to ask the generations who place this future in your hands, this is only normal and natural. In fact, it is desirable and certainly not something that should be prohibited or punished in any way. So I am delighted that we are engaging in dialogue, that we are coming together on days like this, and that we are making time in our very busy schedules to think about the fundamentals, about justice and equality, about tackling the climate crisis, and about the importance of human rights in our world. That, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, brings us to the actual topic of my speech. What I would like to do today is offer you an insight into my standpoints as a member of parliament, into my beliefs and experiences as a politician, but above all as a feminist and human rights activist. And I would like to start with the really quite poetic words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we, the international community, gifted to ourselves exactly 70 years ago. According to Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. To my mind, this is a wonderfully powerful declaration of commitment that puts people and not governments or states first. It is a statement of commitment that emphasizes the universality, the inalienability, and indivisibility of human rights, and therefore the fundamental equality of every person on this planet. This, and nothing less, should be our goal. If anything, we should complete the statement. After all, there's nothing to prevent us from invoking a spirit of sisterhood as well as brotherhood. You see, at least since the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, ending violence and discrimination, empowering women, girls, and marginalized groups has become more than simply a fundamental issue of justice. It is an integral part of the canon of universal human rights. So when I stand before you today and talk about gender equality, it is not a token gesture or a pleasing add-on to other supposedly more important issues such as economy or defense. It is nothing less than a human right, for it goes without saying that women are humans too, with the same claim to the same rights as men. This, however, is far from being reality. Whether we are talking about Qatar or the US, Bangladesh or Germany, women do not have equal access to participation and co-determination to the same rights and resources as men. What is more, for women, particularly in the global south, the impacts of hunger, poverty, and armed conflict are especially severe. The effects of climate change also hits women in these countries particularly hard. This is why we should ask ourselves, what must we do? How do we need to change our politics, our behavior, the actual understanding of ourselves in order to end this injustice, all these abuses once and for all? Let's return in this context to my earlier example, the international climate policy. With just 1 degree of warming of our atmosphere, the climate crisis is already harsh a reality in many regions of the world. Extreme weather events are occurring much more frequently and with greater severity than in the past. But the climate crisis also means drought or floods, like in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, like in Iran. Means species extinction, like in Germany, 80% of the wild bees disappeared. It means the invaluable loss of homeland, of cultures that are thousands of years old. In my role as Vice President of the German Parliament, I recently visited several regions whose survival is under threat from the climate crisis. Kiribati, an island state in the Pacific island, like Fiji, is at risk of vanishing beneath the waves of the Pacific, like the Maldives. In Bangladesh, entire stretches of coastline are being swept away, taking people's livelihoods and life stories with them. Already 6 million climate refugees or climate migrants. Vast swaths of Africa. We need look no further than Ethiopia or the Lake Chad region are already feeling the direct effects, partly because climate change is worsening existing conflicts over water, over land, and over resources. We just spoke with the students. The Chad Lake had the dimension of Germany. Meanwhile, the Chad Lake has the dimension of Berlin. But there are millions of people around. Where they are going to? To Sudan? What is Sudan doing? That's our discussion and problems we have to deal with. So when United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, speaking at the conference in the Polish city of Katowice last December, described climate change as a matter of life and death, he was not exaggerating. He was simply making clear the dramatic, the extreme nature of the reality. To reduce the risk of a predicted hot age, to achieve the United Nations target of keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, immediate and ambitious action is needed and long overdue, yet the exact opposite is happening. According to experts, we are heading for global warming averaging around 3.2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. If that point is reached, hundreds of millions of people all over the world will have to leave their homes for good simply to survive. 30 million people have already been displaced by climate change today. And yet again, it is the developing countries and the least developed countries that are 5 times more vulnerable to this climate-related displacement than the industrialized nations. So the climate crisis is in many ways also a crisis of global justice. Indeed, while the main contributors to climate change are the industrialized countries of the global north, including countries like China, India, and the Arab states, the most devastating impacts have been and will be felt mainly by countries and communities in the global south, by the very people that is who, from a historical perspective, bear least responsibility for global warming. That, however, is not all. Within the societies of the global south, the people who will be hardest hit are those whose livelihoods are based around natural resources and who have the fewest options when it comes to coping with natural hazards, droughts, mudslides, floods, or cyclones. In other words, the people who climate change will hit hardest are those who lack adaptive capacities in the form of capital and resources, who have no access to defense mechanisms, and who are already marginalized. Once again, these people, and this closes my circle, are by and large women. The statistics bear this out. More women than men die in floods or heat waves worldwide. Women have less access to information, so disaster warnings reach them later. The traditional gender-based division of roles means that women spend more time at home, In an emergency, therefore, they have to look after the children and other family members as well as themselves. And I don't need to tell you that it is far more difficult for pregnant women, women with children, and the elderly to run for cover. Still, there is another aspect to this. Indeed, the climate crisis prolongs periods of drought, putting food security at risk. As a result, women are spending more hours working in the fields, which means that they have less time for education, for other paid work, for political activity. Women are also having to walk longer distances to fetch water or fuel wood, which means that they face a greater risk of sexual harassment, assault, and rape. Finally, who stays behind in the under-provisioned regions when the men leave home as a consequence of drought, soil salinization, or rising sea levels? Yes, that's right, women, who are left behind to contend with growing socio-economic challenges. All of this leads us to one conclusion, dear friends. The climate crisis presents challenges on a vast scale, particularly for women and marginalized groups. On the one hand, it reinforces existing discrimination. On the other hand, this discrimination itself results in women being particularly disadvantaged in terms of their adaptive capacities and their response to emergencies. It is a vicious circle which we urgently need to break. We can only do so, however, if we recognize that climate policy cannot and will not be successful without gender justice, without equality for women. So this is my message today. If we want to improve our strategic position, if we want to mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis as effectively as possible, this cannot happen without equality. And it cannot happen without women's expertise, knowledge, women's skills, and a female perspective. A feminist climate policy, therefore, thinks big about these two areas. It involves women as well as men in negotiations and decision-making, and it systematically addresses the question of how future decisions or developments will impact on women and girls. Because, of course, women's rights are human rights. Because women, especially in the global south, are particularly impacted by climate change. Because women at the same time are key players in efforts to tackle the climate crisis, are agents in shaping sustainable change. Ladies and gentlemen, students, in all of this, however, the work starts as always in our own backyard. There is nothing wrong with criticizing others for not doing enough to protect the climate, to promote equality, to support our equitable and sustainable development. But this criticism is only credible if our own policies lead by example. So let's work together in Qatar, in Germany, in Europe, around the world for coherent international policies that no longer turn a blind eye to the fact that our exports, our growth, our consumption are leading to poverty, the ruthless exploitation of nature, and a lack of a future elsewhere. For that is exactly what happens when we decide not to care about the climate damage caused by our energy policy, when we are not really bothered about the conditions endured by the workers who make the clothes on our backs, when we tacitly accept that women still have fewer rights than men all around the globe. Therefore, let us work for international policies that actively promote gender justice, that include women and marginalized groups instead of perpetuating, you know what I mean, and reinforcing discriminatory structures. After all, A society is more likely to achieve development progress if it embraces the opportunity for free and open debate about political, social, and economic visions. If this is the case, however, all key stakeholders must have the chance to be involved, and that is not the reality at present. Also, around 52% of the world's population is female. We still mainly find men in control in politics, business, academia, and the media. If only the male perspective is represented, however, both in terms of the people and the agenda, not only it is unjust, not only does it conflict with the universal and indivisible human rights, not only does it inadequately reflect reality, it also leads ultimately time and time again, from generation to decisions which mainly benefit those who sit around the table, men. Many women's rights activists and feminists around the world, myself included, have therefore set ourselves a goal. We shall not rest until equal participation is achieved. For me, though, it is not only about counting the number of women around the table. It is about ensuring that women count, that people find themselves in the center of politics, not states or armies or companies, that we do not put our country but human dignity first. That is what has always inspired me and many others to work for a different politics. And I am grateful for any support. However, there is considerable resistance. I still recall very vividly that when I was the German government's Commissioner for Human Rights, I often heard doubts and objections being voiced, especially here in the so-called Arabic or Islamic world, but also from the Vatican and other parts of the world. These human rights, I was told, are a Western concept, so they don't apply to anyone else. In fact, the opposite is true. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its follow-up resolution capture the essence of human dignity, and dignity transcends any nation or culture. Dignity does not depend on a person's gender, on their identity, on their sexual orientation, on their assigned origin. Dignity does not depend on a person's income or faith. Human rights are rights that every individual possesses simply by virtue of being human. No matter where they live, everyone has a right to food. Everyone has a right to a life without torture. Everyone has a right to live in freedom. So it is not unlawful interference in a country's internal affairs for human rights organizations to campaign, but only right and logical. It is only right and logical for Amnesty International to argue for the release of Raif Badawi and other good friends in Saudi Arabia. It is only right and logical to argue for the release of Nasrin Sotoudeh, one very famous, prominent, great human rights lawyer in prison in Iran. And there are other examples. And I think it was important that the International Labour Organization demanded that the rights of migrant workers on the construction sites for the football or soccer World Cup in 2022 is fully respected. And you can see the progress. You can see that Qatar now, meanwhile, can be a role model and a pioneer in the Gulf region if, for example, and I do hope it will happen, it already happened more or less, that the kafala system is passed. It will make pressure on all the others. And this is important, and it's only right and logical to come back to our main topic for the Egyptian writer Nawal el-Saadawi, to emphasize that women's rights and advocacy for them are universal. When she writes, feminism is embedded in the culture and in the struggle of all women around the world. The logical consequence then is solidarity that transcends all borders. No movement, no country, no continent can achieve complete gender equality on its own. Likewise, we will only safeguard the survival of humankind on this wonderful planet of ours if we take action together against the climate crisis, against patriarchal structures of exploitation, and if we advocate for a world of gender justice together. We must stand together, make our voices heard, share our knowledge, no matter how diverse the challenges at the local and at the regional level are. And we must stand together across all sectors, across all layers of society too, including the less well-off classes of society. For the struggle against discrimination and oppression cannot only be waged in circles where some women already enjoy better conditions than many other of their female compatriots. To me, feminism is not something that we should endorse and promote only when it happens to be convenient, when it offers us some kind of advantage or does not involve much effort. To me, feminism is the liberating vision of a world without violence and oppression, a world where everyone can live in freedom from discrimination, a world where everyone is equal and can participate actively in society. And this, ladies and gentlemen, friends, brings me to my final point. When I talk about everyone, when I talk about a liberating vision for our society, this always involves much more than gender issues. Put differently, feminism and its critique of the prevailing system should not be reduced to a simple man versus woman dichotomy, because that does not go far enough. The color of someone's skin, their education, their sexual orientation, and especially their financial status have a major influence on their pathway through life and their experiences of exclusion. A Southeast Asian domestic worker experiences different forms of discrimination than you do as female students at Georgetown University. And as female students, you yourselves have different experience of discrimination than your male classmate. What I am saying is this: everywhere in the world, what we are dealing with in almost every case is a synchrony of multiple forms of discrimination. And I also include my country, I include Germany. Women are excluded and treated unequally in Qatar or in Germany, simply because they are women, but also in many instances because they are poor, because they are from a different background or from a different faith, because they are disabled, young or old. That is why a progressive intersectional feminism, as we call it, sees women's lack of empowerment as interlocking with other forms of discrimination and packages the major justice issues of our time together. This is why it comes as no or little surprise that it is often the feminists who are most consistent in resisting the resurgence of authoritarian or nationalist or right-wing, extreme right-wing politics, racism and human rights abuses in their countries. And that is often the feminists who counter these abuses with policies based on justice, human rights and cooperation. These feminists then, and I say this quite deliberately, are men and women. These feminists are men and women. The fact is, and this goes out to the gentlemen in the room, the fact is that you don't have to be a woman to know that the systematic discrimination against women in our societies, the violence against women, the oppression of women are wrong. Men can and should campaign for equal treatment and equal rights as well. There's nothing weak about it, all to the contrary. Dear friends, dear students, Dean, there's one fundamental conclusion to be drawn from all of this, and it is this: our world, our society need radical structural change, and that needs to come from us. Discrimination and exclusion are the products of structures that have existed for centuries. So if we want to cure the symptoms, if we want to guarantee equal rights for men and women, if we want to grant women equal decision-making power in the family, in land rights, in inheritance law, if we want to end other forms of discrimination and exploitation, then there's much that we need to change. Then there is still a lot of work for us to do, particularly for you and for your generation. I'm convinced, however, that a more diverse, a more just, a more peaceful world, a world in which men and women meet on equal terms, is worth every effort. Thus, now more than ever, self-confident and courageous voices are needed, especially women's voices, to advocate for a society in which everyone can live in freedom from violence and oppression. Let me therefore appeal to the students among us today, male and female alike. Let us move forward together, learning from our diverse perspective, from our different experience. Let us show solidarity in our engagement for a more just and peaceful world. Above all, though, let us be honest with one another. Voice criticism, ask questions, for only through dialogue can we build better mutual understanding, accept new viewpoints, and learn new lessons. So I'm very excited about the discussion with you all, and please don't go easy on me. No, be open and honest. Don't hold back. After all, dialogue and discussion are what universities are for. Before that, however, I have one last request from an elder stateswoman to you. Young students, as it were, please always take a stand. Dare to embrace change. Trust yourselves to doubt and make mistakes. Make your way through life with a listening ear and an open mind with an abundance of empathy. Take as much inspiration, as many ideas, and as much knowledge as you can from your studies. And share your thoughts with others. Support each other, especially those who need it most. Bring yourself and your ideas to the table, for this world needs people like you, people who are smart, who are visionary. It needs people who challenge and criticize, who do so, I hope, with a feminist mindset. It needs young women and men with the courage to think differently, to step out of line, think outside the box, and it needs them now more than ever, in Germany, worldwide, and in Qatar, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Roth, for gracing us your presence here today. My name is Natasha, and I'm a second-year student here. You mentioned the criticalness of youth empowerment to various fields, such as women empowerment and climate change. However, would you not agree that it's actually something that is quite idealistic? I really do appreciate your passion, but as a student, and I think many of my classmates can also agree with me, coming from countries where we do not necessarily have democracies, or we do not even have freedom of speech in my country, what kind of leverage do youth actually really have then? What kind of influence can we really make? And how should we kind of approach citizen engagement in that regard?
I don't think that it's idealistic to insist that we really have to take action. It would be a crime, really, to say, okay, they don't have a democracy, there is no civic society, let them continue like it is, let us continue like it is. For example, in Tuvalu, I met a person in Tuvalu, the former president of Kiribati. Kiribati is bigger than Europe from the size. And he said, the former president, why don't you build us an island? Like Hong Kong is now building a new island. And he said, like the palm, where is it, in Dubai, where is it? I don't know, the palm. And the person of Tuvalu said, no, because then you continue like you did all the time before. So I do think our responsibility, especially together with the developing countries or the least developed countries, is to support civic societies, to support the real development, to meet them on an equal level. Not to say we are give them a little bit of this, but to really to help them and to give them also the means to do something against the climate crisis that's happening. And Bangladesh is really dramatic. If we have this 3.2 degrees, then Bangladesh will no longer exist. And this is not idealistic or romantic or something great. It is reality. And I think our task as human beings is to give this universal declaration the importance that it has. Very often one is celebrating it in December. But it's not, it must be every day, it must be celebrated. So even in a least developed country, children should have their rights, should go to school, should have education. So I don't think it's idealistic. Some would say it's romantic, but I think it's realistic. If we do not do anything in this world, then we have already lost. And yes, it's true what you say. It's not only in some parts of the world. If I listen to the new elected president of Brazil, sorry, this is not democracy. It's the fourth largest democracy in the world, but the president is anti-democratic. He's humiliating women. He's ignoring the rights of indigenous. He wants to cut the rainforest. So he's a danger for the whole world if it comes to climate crisis. So I think if you would say it's idealistic, then be idealistic. If one would say it's romantic, then be romantic. I'm sure this is the most realistic approach to this world. Once again, Guterres said it's a question of surviving, whether we survive or not. And the basis of everything, I'm convinced, is democracy.
Thank you, Ms. Roth, for the very inspiring speech. My question is that, what advice do you have for feminists who live in patriarchal societies? When they go about to spread their message, how do they convince people that feminism is a movement that does not necessarily have to happen on the expense of men, especially in the economic sector?
Yes, I think it's a very, very good question. So I define feminism, what I said, it's men and women. Because I think if it comes to economic interests or economic growth, I think no industrialized country, no country at all can have success without the competence of women. We have the best educated generation. We have very competent women. We have the best university degrees of women. I hear it from teachers, from university teachers. They say women are better than men. Okay, that's sometimes easy, but it would be crazy if our industry, for example, would say, no, we don't want them to have them as a part of our industry, of our enterprises. And so we have a long debate on introducing quotas to allow to open doors for women. And Norway introduced a quota with 40%, but they were so successful, especially in the field of economy, that meanwhile they are more than 50, I think around 60% of women in the high levels of also big enterprises. I think we must make clear it's a kind of in their own interest. It's in a common interest. It's not only our rights as a woman, but it's in the interest. It's in the interest of economy, but it's also in the interest of living together. Therefore, I always think it should also be the fight of the men, that they think it's a better life if we meet ourselves on the same level. If women are not considered to be second class, it takes quite a long time. I grew up in a rural area, and when I was 10 years old, other parents said, this girl, is it worth to send her to a high school? She will be married. So it's not worth to do it. But it changed, it really changed. And we should take men in our arms, take them in their arms and make them clear that it's a better life and that we are all human beings, equal. different but with equal rights. And in economy, it's quite clear. It's quite clear that women are so good and they have so many competences, emotional intelligence, social competences. If you say it's not necessary, you would lose. It's always what we are arguing in Germany, because we are really behind. We are really behind, be it university, be it economy, be it our parliament. Look, we have only 30% in our parliament. This is really not good. It is bad. It's very bad for the atmosphere in the parliament. It is very bad that in some committees you have only a few men. But it's important that also men are working in a committee for family or for young family, youth, and family affairs. I don't know exactly the title, but the only man in this committee in the German parliament is a green man. But it's important that it's also from the man perspective one is discussing it. And it's really a bad situation that we have less women in the German parliament with 709 members of parliament. Only 30%. It's less than, we are now in the year 1998. And this is bad for the quality. We have to make clear that it's our proper rights, yes, but it has also to do with quality. And also in politics, in the diplomatic field, in all the fields, in sports. You have wonderful representative of sports in Qatar. So this is important, and it's also good for the men.
So thank you for your speech. You mentioned that most of climate change comes from the global north, and it's true that large corporations have a large role to play in climate change. And without denying that individual action can cause a change, what do you think governments can and have to do in regards to limiting the power of large corporations to contribute to this large climate change that's happening right now?
I think we had 3 years ago a really successful conference in Paris. And only few thought it would come to an end, it would have a positive end. Probably it was influenced, I was there, it was influenced by this terrible terrorist attack where many people were killed in Paris. So the atmosphere was not crying or fighting with each other. People were very touched. It was a very good atmosphere. And for example, I give you one example. He's an actor. I don't think he's a very good actor, sorry, but I don't think that Schwarzenegger is a very good actor. And he's a member of the Republican Party in the United States of America. It was amazing how he addressed this conference. It was really very important. He was so credible. He spoke about his grandmother in Austria, in the mountain area in Austria. And he described the situation in the mountain area. I'm coming also from a mountain area in Germany, South Germany. And he described how there the situation is meanwhile changed. And then he said, and now in California, we have no water anymore. We are running out of water. And on the other side of the border, it's even worse. So this was very successful, and we have it. We have the Paris Agreement. Everything is in it. We would do it even more. We would ask for more as a Green Party. But everything is on the table, but it's not enough to discuss it. It's not enough. It's not enough. You have to implement it. You have to implement it. And the same successful multilateral agreement are the Sustainable Development Goals. And what is new and what is radical with the Sustainable Development Goals is that it's not like the Millennium Development Goals, which were addressed to the developing countries or the least developed countries, but the Sustainable Development Goals ask us to start in our own backyard. So energy policy, water, use of water, which of course is a problem in Qatar. I can make speeches like this, but you need water, and it's not so easy. If you want to have green areas, of course you need water. So I'm not here to make finger pointing, but we have to start. We have to start in our own background. And unfortunately, many governments, also parliaments, did not understand that the Sustainable Development Goals is not something what the African countries have to do or to fulfill. Also in our meeting, there are so many representatives of Africa. No, we have to do it. We have to start with it. And it's not only energy, it's not only to phase out of coal, which is of course difficult if you have many people working in the field of coal, which is in Germany still a problem, but we have to phase out. If not, how can we ask India or Bangladesh? The people in Bangladesh have a right for economic growth. They want to, I spoke to the president, the prime minister, and she said we have been a least developed country. Now we want to become a middle income country, but there we need energy. So how can we help a country like Bangladesh to not to build many new coal plants, because the most modern one is bad for the climate. So we have to start at home. We have to help others to mitigate. We have to help to compensate. But concerning, for example, the islands of in the Pacific, what can I tell these people? What can I tell the people of Kiribati? The highest place in Kiribati is 3 meters. So when we were there, our appointments were only possible when one knew whether the tide is high or not as high that the whole island is overflooded. 3 meters. If we have a warming of 2 degrees, we are now on 3.2, the way on 3.2. But if you would have 2 degrees, the water level would rise by 7 meters. So it's probably or realistically, Kiribati probably will disappear, but what will happen to the people? And all these questions we have to discuss. For example, the former foreign minister of Australia, he said, okay, let them come to Australia, let them become Australians. We will give them the citizenship, they can become Australians. The people of Tuvalu told me, yeah, but we are not Australians. We are the people of Tuvalu. Tuvalu is our nation. So if we have to relocate as a nation, how can we keep our status as being a citizen of Tuvalu? All these questions arise. Or you have a good friend here, a student, she's from Sudan. What can I tell the ambassador of Sudan when he told me, Mrs. Roth, we are a poor country. We are a country with the necessity of reconciliation, of political reforms. We want to become a country with good infrastructure, also on a political level. Can we receive millions of people from Chad and from other regions in the Sahel? So this is our responsibility, and not to. I'm really very disappointed what happened in the last conferences. In the last conference in Poland, in Katowice, because there is now a rule book. Okay, we have now a rule book, but there was nothing decided what to do with those countries who are already affected in the most terrible way. And what's happening in Mozambique, what's happening in Zimbabwe and Malawi, it's a natural catastrophe, it's terrible. And it's not only, but also the climate crisis contributed. So we have to be really responsible. Germany has to be responsible. It's not only the energy question, it's not only phasing out of coal, it's not only having only solar or wind, renewable energy. It's also the question, how do we deal with traffic, the traffic in the big cities? What are we doing? How can we contribute also with our kind of mobility? What about agriculture? the EU agriculture is more an agro-industrialized system. It has nothing to do with farming. So it is also contributing to the climate crisis. So it's a long, long, long story, and almost everything has to contribute. Also, we have to contribute, but it would be very easy. There's one criticism towards the young the children now in the streets. They are always asked now in interviews, what is your personal contribution? Do your parents have a car? Do you go by plane to holidays? Of course you can try your utmost, but it's not, the main responsibility does not lie in the families of these children, but it's the structure, the international structure and the national structure. It's our economy, our way of living.
Thank you very much. I don't like to speak in details because of time, but you mentioned a lot about sustainable development, global warming, but you forget something which must be adopted in the APU. This which I call satanic swap between sales of arms to our poor countries to make prosperity and jobs in the advanced countries and deteriorate and destroy our countries, instead of sending to us technology, machines to enhance living standard that we can get rid of terrorism and illegal immigration. The second thing, why you support advanced countries, our dictators, totalitarian regimes, which killing us day and night, sending to them and selling to them equipment of torture. You receive Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the thug killing us
not
day
myself,
and night.
but others.
Thank you.
So, Ali, please, can you send him my speech in the IPU? Because I exactly said what you said. In other words, I think we should fight against the causes. I did not speak about the reasons why 70 million people are already refugees, and why more and more people don't have a perspective in their home countries. But I spoke about this in the IPU meeting, and I said, let's start with the causes and not fight the refugees. And point number one was arms export. Be sure. And we have a vital debate in Germany, and I'm sure that the majority in my country, and that is not all Greens, are against sending weapons, for example, to Saudi Arabia. Providing a country with weapons, or any country's weapons, who are participating in terrible wars, like in Yemen or in other parts of the world. We have strict rules that German arms should not be sent in regions where crises already are a reality, in countries where human rights are violated. So if our government, now I'm criticizing the governments, I criticized also government where the Green were part, to countries like Turkey, where human rights are systematically violated, then we are not allowed to send arms to these countries. You are right. Arms export is very malicious, it's very bad. The problem is that we have, meanwhile, a kind of, that arms have now more than not only the German citizenship, but also the French and the British. So there are projects, corporations, and we are stronger than the others. So be sure, I fully agree that it's with arms exports you also be responsible, not the only responsible, but co-responsible for conflicts. But it's not only arms export, it's a kind of agricultural idea in the European Union, which is producing, for example, chicken, many more chicken that we can eat in the European Union, and the parts we do not eat anymore or are no more attractive in the European Union, in our households, we send, for example, to Ghana on a very low price, and with these low-priced chicken, we destroy the regional farmers in Ghana. And then We are criticizing people to leave Ghana because they don't have a perspective. So this is also in my speech. I will deliberately send it to you. I did it in the name of the German delegation. And the trade relation, we are arguing since quite a long time that we need fair trade, not war on trade and things like this. You are right, but but of course there's also the necessity that in many, many countries there must be democratic reforms, there must be a recognition of Declaration of Human Rights, of international law. We are co-responsible, but not the only.